in Joshua. It's actually January still. Now this is going to still be in Joshua in February and March, but it's officially January Bible study, at least for the next few weeks. And it's Joshua chapter 2 this morning. We're just going to work our way through the book of Joshua so you can kind of know what's next. It'll be Joshua 3 next week, but it's Joshua 2. And I'm just wondering why you're turning there. If any of you might have a family member that you might be embarrassed to introduce to the rest of us. I mean, it could be for a lot of different reasons. It might be you think maybe they lack the proper education or social grace, or maybe they have a thick Appalachian hillbilly accent. Maybe they say night instead of night. Now, you might not even be able to tell the difference between what I just said because I'm a hillbilly. But, you know, it just might be one of those situations where you know if you brought your aunt to church, she would wear leggings for pants with Crocs. Or maybe like a 1980s members-only jacket. I hope no one's here today with a 1980s members-only jacket. But, something like Cousin Eddie from Christmas Vacation. That's what you picture. I had a denim jacket, not blazer like this, but like coat that my wife had given me before we were married. Now this was like in that 1980s, so I think it was trendy. The kind of denim jacket it was trendy when she gave it to me, in about 1987. Well, I'm about the same size I've always been. I still kept that in my closet, and I don't know, something hit me. I decided to wear it to class one day in early 2000s at OBU, and I thought, my denim jacket was looking pretty good. I walked in, and this smart aleck student says something to the effect of, "Hey, Dr. Kelly, the 80s call, they want their jacket back." Just a little bit, felt a little bit embarrassed there. Or maybe you could never bring one of your family members to a church dinner because you've just had too much trauma in restaurants when you go out to eat with them. I mean, your uncle goes directly to the manager to find out if there are any discounts he might get on that day. Or maybe it's just in the way they order. You go into Chick-fil-A, you got a server there whose pleasure it is to serve you, and your cousin asks, "Can I get a hamburger?" Or they're asking, "Do you have a vegetarian ribeye at Outback?" Or like a student told me on I assume a one date that he had with this girl, she ordered a pasta dish and she asked the server if she could substitute the penne, for the penne, she could have fettuccine because she was allergic to penne pasta. And he asked her, like, "You're allergic to shape?" Or that family member is going to send it back. I mean, the steak's either too dry or it's undercooked, or maybe, the pinto beans are too cold, or the fries are too greasy, or the chicken's just a little chickeny. Might embarrass you. It does my kids when anything like that happens. It has all their lives, I think, but it certainly does now. But more seriously, maybe you'd be embarrassed to bring one of your family members to church to meet all of us because maybe they've staked out some rather public position on a political or sensitive issue in the community. Maybe they've identified very clearly and boldly with like those who advocate for same-sex marriage, or maybe they've staked out a position where they are very supportive of abortion on demand just as a means of birth control. And you think, man, I'd be embarrassed to take them to church. Everybody knows about them. Or maybe it's more serious. Maybe it's related to some sort of criminal behavior, like maybe drug abuse or scamming elderly out of money. Or maybe even more heinous crimes like rape or child abuse. Well, let's say one of those members of your family was a prostitute. Would you want the rest of us to know? Well, that's kind of where we find ourselves in Joshua chapter 2. This woman, Rahab, she's a very strange lady to meet in church or in the Bible. You might recall last week, Moses died and Joshua's now taking over. And he's told his officers, Prepare everyone, we're going to cross the Jordan, and we're going to go into the promised land. But before they cross the Jordan, there's something he feels he needs to do. And that's where we pick it up at Joshua chapter 2. And let's start with a strange place to hide. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Joshua the son of Nun secretly sent 2 men as spies from the acacia grove, saying, "Go and scout the land, especially Jericho." So they left, and they came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelite men have come here tonight to investigate the land." And then the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab and said, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, for they've come to investigate the entire land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. So she said, "Yes, the men did come to me, but I did not know where they were from. And at nightfall, when the city gate was about to close, the men went out, and I don't know where they're going. Chase after them quickly, and you can catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them upon the stalks of flax that she'd arranged on the roof. And the men pursued them along the road to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as they left to pursue them, the city gate was shut. So in preparation for going into the promised land, and the first city they're going to encounter in the promised land is a fortified walled city, Jericho. In order to make preparation to go into that land, Joshua's sending out 2 spies. He wants them to investigate the walls. What might be the weaknesses there? Should we attack more from the north or the south? Maybe we can, some sort of deception, maybe try to draw them out and then rush in from the sides. How are we going to do this? He sends out spies. You know, Joshua would know something about spies. Joshua was a spy. He had served as a spy, he and Caleb, back when Moses had sent them into the land. Now, it's interesting, these Israelite spies, they're not always the best at espionage. Those 12 who went in, well, they weren't discovered, but they did come back with the wrong report. We can't take the land. Of course, they could have, and God wanted them to, but they came back and said, we can't do it. The problem now, Joshua, who was one of these spies 40 years earlier, now sends 2 spies. Their problem is they're immediately discovered. I mean, they must be terrible at hiding. And look where they hid. In the home of a woman named Rahab, who was a prostitute. Now, we know some things about her. We know, one, she was ancient. I mean, this was 3,500 years ago, so she's an ancient woman. We know that she was a Gentile. She's not a descendant of Abraham. She's a resident of Jericho, and she's a Gentile. Now, it's one thing to be a Gentile. It's another thing to be a Gentile who's part of a people who are about to become enemy combatants with the Israelites. She's not just any Gentile. She's a Jerichoite who lives in a city that's about to be besieged by the Israelite soldiers. We also know that she's a woman in a very male-dominated world. And isn't it interesting that in a male-dominated culture, very patriarchal world, we only know the name of one person from Jericho, and it's Rahab. I mean, we hear about her father and her brothers. We might expect some of the men there to be named, but they're not. It's just this woman, Rahab. And then maybe most significantly, we notice she is a prostitute. She sold her body. She provided sexual favors for money. And though it was a recognized profession in the ancient world, by any measure, prostitution was a shameful act. And we actually get this in the book of Leviticus. We find it in the law that God gave to Moses. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 29, this is the law. Do not debase your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will be prostituted and filled with depravity. It's like if you have a prostitute among the Israelites, it will not only defile her body, it will actually defile the whole land in which she lives. And then in chapter 21 of Leviticus, verse 9, this is instructions to priests. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by prostitution, she defiles her father, she must be burned to death. A rather harsh penalty for a woman who has this profession. Sure seems strange that these two spies, when they get into Jericho, find this as their hiding place, the home of Rahab, who is a prostitute. Maybe this is just smart calculation. Maybe they're thinking, okay, if we're going in at nightfall, we're trying to go under cover of night, we're trying to slip into a house and maybe need to slip out again, where would men be going in and out throughout the night? Maybe the home of a prostitute. And so maybe that'd be a good place to kind of blend in with people coming and going through the night. If so, they miscalculated. Because immediately the king of Jericho knows not only that they're in the city, but sends soldiers directly to Rahab's house, saying, send out those spies that we know you're hiding. And her answer is, well, they were here, but I don't know what happened to them. They ran out quickly. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where they were from. Yes, they were here. They're gone now. If you'll chase after them, you'll probably be able to catch them. So they go into her home. She lies to protect them. She does not tell the truth. This would be a clear violation of the 9th commandment about bearing false witness. But she couldn't have known the 9th commandment. She's not an Israelite. She doesn't have the law. She certainly doesn't know the teaching of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, which says, let your yes be yes and your no, no, because her yes is here, not yes. Maybe we should cut her some slack, though. There's a lot riding on whether she tells the truth here or not. Should she just say, well, I got to be truthful. Yep, they're hiding in my roof. If she did, those two spies would be killed. So she says, nope, they're already gone. It reminds us that we often find ourselves in sticky situations, and we're called upon to be honest about the situation, and we should be honest. We should be fully honest people. We should let our yes be yes and our no, no. We should live our lives in such a way that if I tell you something, you will believe it because I've demonstrated I will tell the truth. But there might be such an extreme situation at some time in your life where life or death hinges on your response. And at that moment, you've got to ask yourself, what does the truth require? I think about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's a German theologian during the rise of Hitler. And so he is teaching in the university in Germany, preaching in churches, while Jews are being sent off to concentration camps and murdered. He comes to believe that something has to be done. He becomes part of an organization within the German government where he's supposed to go out and be trying to sort of win over people towards Germany's causes. What he's actually doing is going out and telling people what Hitler's doing and trying to organize movements against the Nazis. He becomes part of a plot to have Hitler assassinated. The plot fails, he gets arrested, but he refuses to be truthful about his co-conspirators. Bonhoeffer wrestled with what to do in situations like that. He'd actually written a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. He knew all about let your yes be yes and your no, no. But in that moment, he determined that what the truth required was to be part of a movement to try to get rid of Hitler, even if it required dishonesty. So I'll give you a break here. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your answer, truthful or not, might take down a Hitler or save 6 million Jews, we'll cut you some slack if you decide to do something other than just tell the straight truth. But the truth is, that's not going to be the situation for you 99.9% of the time in your life. You're going to be faced with whether to tell the truth, and whether or not you tell it will determine maybe your pride or your ego, or maybe some consequence that you might have to suffer. Like you didn't get that paper done in time. I'll speak to my constituents. You didn't get that paper done in time, so you say, my computer crashed when the paper was done and the computer crashed. Can I have an extra week to complete it? And of course, the computer didn't crash. Or maybe you missed a meeting and you say, well, my phone died and my alarm didn't go off this morning. And your phone didn't die. You're just trying to rescue yourself from consequences. But Rahab's in a different kind of spot. If she says yes, they're here, they are going to die. But by saying no, she puts herself at grave risk. And so she protects them. And then we hear a surprising confession beginning at verse 8 and going through verse 11. Before the men fell asleep, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we have heard how the Lord had dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings that you completely destroyed on the east side of the Jordan. And when we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and earth below. Now, this is even more surprising than when we find ourselves in the home of a prostitute with the spies. It's her confession of faith here. I mean, all you can do is say, wow. When she says in verse 9, I know that the Lord, your translation might have all caps there. It might, depending on how they handle these. But this is actually the Hebrew name Yahweh. And a lot of English translations will capture that with all capitals, L-O-R-D. They'll translate it Lord. She actually uses the divine name in her confession to them about the Lord and what he's done. The Lord, Yahweh, has given you this land, and we're all melting in fear because of it. And then she continues in verse 10, we've heard how the Lord, using again the divine name, dried up the waters of the Red Sea. And then in 11, it's actually even the strongest. At the end of verse 11, she says, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. I mean, we hear a lot of weak confessions of faith. You could probably ask people where you work, where you go to school, in your neighborhood. You could probably knock on any door and say, do you believe in God? And you're going to get in Oklahoma a very high percentage of people who will say, yeah, I believe in God. I mean, that's not much of a confession. What God do you believe in? Just some higher power, just some God who created things, got things rolling, and then got out of the way? What kind of God do you have in mind? Now, that's a tougher question. Well, her confession is a very specific confession. It's better than just, I believe in God. She uses the divine name, Yahweh. She points to specific acts that this God has performed, bringing the Israelites through the Red Sea and bringing them up out of Egyptian slavery. She refers to that actual act of God. And then she mentions what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings. That's two kings who were on the east side of the Jordan that Moses had led the Israelites to defeat. And when they defeated them, that's where they settled the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. She knows that this has occurred, and she attributes it to their God. And then that final confession, the Lord, Yahweh, your God, is God in heaven above and on earth below. That sounds like a pretty firm and strong confession of faith to me. Even though she's a Canaanite, Jerichoite woman, Gentile, she's confessing that Israel's God is the one true God. And then she demonstrates that she believes that he is the one true God by hiding these spies in her house. She puts her life at risk to provide safety for them. Have you ever heard faith without works is dead? You know, James says that in the New Testament. In fact, she's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. And 2 of the 3 relate specifically to her faith and her actions which demonstrated her faith. The first time is in Hebrews chapter 11. It's the hall of fame of faith. It's like the heroes of the faith from the Old Testament. And look who shows up. Shady lady. Verse 30, Hebrews 11:30 says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after being marched around by the Israelites for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute welcomed the spies in peace and didn't perish with those who disobeyed. By faith, that's her confession of faith, and then she welcomed the spies and didn't perish. That was her action in display of her faith in their God. And then in James chapter 2, verse 25, this is James' whole discussion of the relationship of faith and works. Now that's a whole nother sermon, but I'll summarize it for you. James argues that faith without works is dead. It's not real faith. Genuine faith works. There will be actions associated with genuine faith. And your actions vindicate your claim to faith. Like a claim of faith would be, I believe God is one. There is one God. James offers that as a possibility. Somebody can say, I believe God is one. He says, well, congratulations. Even the demons believe that. But who might be an example of faith, genuine faith? He gives the example of Abraham. That's his first. Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness, but what else did Abraham do? Well, he acted that demonstrated his faith. Verse 23 of James 2. The scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. Verse 24. You see, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way, wasn't Rahab the prostitute also justified or vindicated by works in receiving the messengers and sending them out a different route? I mean, let's be honest. If I gave you the opportunity, if I said, I need some examples of faith in the Old Testament, and give me some, if I asked you for that, I would expect Abraham would be really high on a lot of lists. And then if I came back and said, that's great, I'll take Abraham, that's my number one, give me another. We'd be here all day before anybody would say Rahab. You'd probably guess Isaac or Jacob or Moses or I don't know. I bet you it'd be some male in the Old Testament, most likely. And then if I said, okay, but give me a woman, we'd still be here a while before you got around to Rahab. James, the inspired author, half-brother of Jesus of this New Testament letter, gets two examples of faith and works, and guess who's number two? Rahab. A genuine confession of faith, vindicated by her actions. And then there's a scarlet cord of salvation. In chapter 2, verses 12 through 24. Now, please swear to me by the Lord that you will also show kindness to my father's family, because I showed kindness to you. Give me a sure sign. She's asking for an oath. That you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death. Seems like a fair request, given that she'd risked her life for them. And the spies answered her, we will give our lives for yours. If you don't report our mission, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land. So initially, yes, but there's going to be some conditions. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, since she lived in a house that was built into the wall of the city. Go to the hill country so that the men pursuing you won't find you, she said to them. Hide there for 3 days until they return, and afterward go on your way. The men said to her, we will be free from this oath you made us swear, unless, when we enter the land, you tie this scarlet cord to the window through which you let us down. Bring your father, mother, brothers, and all your father's family into your house. If anyone goes out the doors of your house, his death will be his own fault, and we will be innocent. But if anyone with you in the house should be harmed, his death will be our fault. And if you report our mission, we are free from the oath you made us swear. So there are three conditions. Yes, we'll do it. But one, you can't tell. You can't say anything about our plan or when we're coming back. That's got to be secret. Number two, this scarlet rope that you're going to let us down out the window, you've got to hang that in your window and leave it there so that when we are here, we'll know which house is yours. And third, your whole family has to remain in the same dwelling or we might not know who they are. So these are the conditions. And of course, she's going to keep them. But the thing that strikes me most is that red rope. It's a red rope. Could have been purple, could have been green and gold, could have been orange and black, could have been a lot of different colors, but it's a red scarlet cord that will hang out her window. I think that red cord is more than just a red cord. That red rope, that scarlet cord that hangs out her window, looks back. I can imagine those Israelite soldiers who are going to march around this city on 6 successive days, one time all the way around. They would walk right by her window, every Israelite soldier. And they would see that red rope hanging out of her window. And on the 7th day, they're going to march 7 times. They'd see that red rope 7 times on that day. And they would know that that red rope hanging out her window makes her house a safe house. The death and destruction that's coming to Jericho will pass over her household because of that red rope hanging out of the window. It looks back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 7, when the blood of a lamb on a doorpost made your home in Egypt a safe house. It allowed the death angel to pass over those Hebrew homes so that their firstborn sons survived. It was the instrument of their salvation, of their being saved from death. And now, this next generation of Israelites would see that red cord. You don't think they'd remember the blood on a doorpost, the red rope hanging out a window? Makes this a safe house. But it also looks forward. It looks forward to the blood of Jesus on the wood, on the cross, which becomes the instrument of our eternal salvation. Now, slightly different salvation here. I'm talking about salvation from our sin, salvation from God's wrath. In the case of both the Exodus and Rahab, it's salvation from imminent death, but it's still being saved. That red cord is worth more than just any red cord. That red cord ties together the Exodus event and Jesus' death on the cross. It ties all Scripture together, Old and New Testament. And then we find a family saved by grace. Now we have to skip forward to chapter 6 for this. Let's pretend now that we've already covered the walls collapsing. That's a future sermon, but I'll let the cat out of the bag here. The walls of Jericho are going to collapse. And the Israelite soldiers are going to rush in and they're going to kill every living thing in Jericho. And they're going to burn the city to the ground. Except Rahab and her family. And so let's pick it up at chapter 6, verse 22. Joshua said to the 2 men who'd scouted the land, "Go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there and all who are with her, just as you swore." So the young men who'd scouted went in, brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho. And she still lives in Israel today. A family saved by grace. Joshua chapter 2, and here the latter part of 6, stands out as an Old Testament saved by grace story. Salvation by faith. Rahab the prostitute and her whole family survived this horrible ordeal because of her confession of faith that Israel's God is Yahweh, the one true God, and by her actions of hiding the spies because she believed their God was the one true God. Sure is strange to meet a lady like that today in church. In fact, I wonder if Rahab found her way on this cold morning to Quail Springs, would you want to be sitting next to her? Look to your right. Seriously, just look to your right. You see that person sitting there? Now don't go too far. I'm not going to tell you that's Rahab the prostitute in the flesh. But you see that person sitting next to you to your right, or maybe you have to look across the aisle. That's a person who's desperately in need of the grace of God. And look over at that person again, sitting to your right. The person sitting to their left is a person who's desperately in need of the grace of God. In a sense, I am Rahab, and so are you. I'm really struck by the last line of this, and she still lives in Israel today. That means on the day the Israelites invaded this city and the walls fell down, when it was all done, she marched out of that city with those Israelites, never to be part of Jericho again, but she did become part of the Israelite community. She's young. You know what happens? Young woman, there's young men. She's part of the Israelite community. She falls in love with a young Jewish man. His name's Salmon. And Rahab and Salmon, they have a son. The fact that she now, prostitution is in her past, she's part of the Israelite community, she's found a husband, they have a child, they have a beautiful family, they send out Christmas cards. What a redemption story. But that child they have, that son they have, his name is Boaz. And you might recognize him because he's willing to marry Ruth, whose husband has died, and she's at great grave risk, and he's related to her husband who had died, so he takes her into his family. And Ruth and Boaz have a son, and his name's Obed. And Obed has a son, and his name's Jesse. And Jesse has a son, and his name's David, the king of Israel. That means that Rahab, the former prostitute, is the great-great-grandmother of David. What's the lesson from a story like that? It's that be careful about putting up walls that say the people on the other side of that wall are beyond the grace of God. God's in the business of tearing those walls down. Physical walls at Jericho or the walls we put up. I imagine on that day when Rahab marched out of that smoldering city, she might have been singing a song, something like Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That's the same song. That's the same song every one of us will be singing when we march into heaven. Amazing Grace.